Live from the American Gulf Coast, it's the Dave Nemo Show.
It's almost impossible to know where to begin this conversation. We're talking with renowned Jewish scholar Deborah Moore. She is the Frederick G. L. Ewett Professor of History and Professor of Judaic Studies at the University of Michigan, and the editor-in-chief of, one of the big parts of our conversation this morning, the Posen Library. The Posen Library of Jewish Culture and Civilization consists of the Posen Digital Library, which is available at posenlibrary.com. That's Posen library.com, and the 10-volume print anthology of Jewish culture published by Yale University Press. Good morning to you. Welcome to the show. It is a pleasure to have you on this day.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, so thank you.
So it's almost, like I said, we were talking in the hard 5-minute break about this. It's almost impossible to figure out where to kind of begin. So let's begin at the beginning. Can we talk about this whole library as it's kind of set up and talk about why it is here and what is so crucial about it and why so many people are going to be able to have access to it in regards to world history, U.S. history, and all points in between?
Sure, that's a big beginning, but it's important. So the library exists. At the moment, half of it is published. The other half awaits publication. It exists to bring to people who read English access to the wide variety of Jewish sources that were written in many, many different languages. So all of these sources have been translated, so you can read them in English and get a sense of the breadth and diversity of Jewish culture. So politics, religion, poetry. There's also an incredible array of visual material, photographs, reproductions of paintings, sculptures, architecture. The goal was really to let English-speaking Jews, but also a wide array of other people who speak English, to understand how various Jewish culture and civilization is, that it's not just what rabbis did. So we have things written by women and not just by men. We have, for example, children's literature, selections from that is also. It's really an enormous amount of fun, and if you go to the digital site, which you mentioned, the posenlibrary.com, you register for free, and then you gain access to all this wonderful material.
And like I said, I spent some time on it the last couple of days, and it's almost overwhelming. Like I said, it's almost better to kind of think of a place you want to go and something you want to find out specifically about. And we were having a conversation earlier on in the show, had it last week, and going to have it again in the future. It's Lewis Carroll's birthday, so rabbit holes are kind of important to this conversation. It really does set up a situation where you can actually begin in one specific location and then let that open up a whole wide world of information, because each bit of primary resource you have only leads to another primary resource, and you begin to get a sense of not only how vast this is, but how interconnected so much of this is, because it's a shared culture along with being a very contributory culture. The idea that it's a culture that kind of is in conversation with itself across time, and the site proves it, because you go back to biblical times and take us all the way up to the present day, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Although we're missing a whole chunk of material that hasn't been completed yet. So only half of the volume. So we will have the biblical material up in March, and then you jump to the 18th and 19th centuries. And 20th centuries. So that big middle period is not there yet. But as you said, you can start at one point and do a search on a date, or you can do a search on the name of a town, or on a topic, and you get a whole variety of items that will appear that let you explore aspects of it. Jews lived in many different parts of the world, and so this brings together that incredible dispersion in one place. You'll have writings from North Africa, from Iran, from China, from Europe, of course, from South America, Israel, the United States. It's really very diverse.
And I was another conversation we were just having this weekend as well. We were talking about that there is a tradition of Judaism in Ethiopia, if I remember correctly.
Yes,
and
that's correct. Yes.
So much that is interesting about the state of Israel. And by the way, if you want to know information about the state of Israel, that information is can be found, can be researched. But that in many ways, people often forget that the state of Israel in and of itself serves as kind of a location, a locale of a centrifuge, as it were, to kind of, they are engaged in the action of pulling things together, the idea of allowing the different elements of Jewish culture to kind of find a home there. And in the same way, the Posen library, in regards to culture and civilization, really, a question I guess I have for you as I'm kind of going on here is, so you guys are not just in the midst of presenting, you're looking too, and it's the hope that the information here then spurs other people, researchers, those who have contributions to make, that they have this stuff to be able to get this information to you as well. So you keep collecting, because you're not anywhere near done here either.
No, we're not anywhere near done, although I do want to comment that about Israel, for example, the latest volume that has appeared, which is volume 9, called Catastrophe and Rebirth, covers the years from 1939 to 1973. So it covers the years of the Holocaust, but also the years of the establishment of the State of Israel. And there's some amazing material from the establishment of the State of Israel, both fiction writing, poetry, song, even some humor from that time period, as well as having very moving material from the years of the Holocaust. So, yeah.
I was going to ask you, with that in mind, the idea that you begin in 39 and we end in 73, which takes us right to the not the beginning, because it begins a little bit sooner than that, but the real, what's the great line from William Shirer, when darkness fell? 39 is really when the darkness really begins to kind of engulf all of Europe, and then takes us right to the aftermath of the Yom Kippur War, which in many ways is one of the most tumultuous periods in the history of Judaism culturally, and kind of really dives into that. This is what I was going to ask you, because we're talking about a really big thing that even when kind of divided into volumes and periods like 39 to 73, how do you curate something like this? How do you make the tough choices about what goes in and what comes out? I realize that the library itself can offer itself as a receptacle for the things that can't make these volumes, but how is this curated? I mean, how do you make decisions about what is going to be part of this collection?
So that's a great question, and in some ways, when you first opened, you answered a piece of it yourself, which is to say, it's a conversation. Curating involves looking back and at these other sources, but also looking around you today and thinking, so what do I want people to be in conversation with that exists in the past? I think that this form of expression, the anthology, is something that's very typical of Jewish culture and civilization. We can think about the Bible itself as a kind of anthology. It's got many different books that are put together. Certainly, Jews have every year at Passover they use something called a Haggadah, right? A text for the Passover Seder, and that too is an anthology because it draws material from all over. So anthologizing itself is a kind of Jewish practice. how do you make decisions? Each of these volumes are either edited or co-edited by senior scholars, and they have advisory boards and that help them. But as the editors of Volume 9 write, they say, the selections in this anthology encourage readers to eavesdrop on many conversations that took place across the Jewish world, or conversely, to ask why certain conversations did not happen. And I think that is one of the real pleasures of the anthology, this chance to eavesdrop on what Jews were talking about, and also to say, hey, why didn't they notice this? But it's an amazingly difficult challenge to decide what's in and what's not in it, and then to draw selections, because there are selections from, let's say, novels. You don't have the whole novel. You have an excerpt from the novel that hopefully entices you perhaps to want to read the whole thing.
It's interesting too, because we live in the United States of amnesia, where it seems like the entire point of being an American citizen is to forget what happened yesterday, much less try to remember what happened 50 years ago. So much of Jewish culture is based on the principle, even before the Holocaust, of remembrance, the idea that we remember. We remember as a culture, we remember as individuals. And the danger of forgetting is that these kind of things can turn into palimpsests. They can actually turn into writing over what already has been and hoping the traces of what was previously there remain. That is not, from what you're talking about, the Jewish culture. It, in many ways, is about remembering. We remember, even in the way we think about the cultural rhythms of what people talk like in Brooklyn. And I laugh always that the idea of the word begat can only come from that culture. That when somebody tells you who they are, they don't just tell you who they are. They actually trace their lineage and their neighbor's lineage to kind of get there. And there does seem to be a sense of that kind of percolates throughout this entire project. Well, if you know him, then you know her, and you know him, and you know them, and that family was there right across the street from the so-and-sos. How am I doing? That's kind of...
Yeah, you're right. I mean, look, one of the big challenges of this project was figuring out how to characterize the writers, because these individuals, like so many Jews, are very mobile. So they may start out in Russia, and then they go to Berlin, and then from Berlin they go to Paris, and then they end up in New York, or maybe they end up in Buenos Aires, and all along the way they write a poem, or they write a novel, or a political tract. How do you characterize these figures? Is this a Russian Jewish writer? Is it a Russian German Jewish writer? Maybe you do it because they end up in Buenos Aires and say they're Argentinian Jewish. It's really very difficult to figure out because of all the connections that Jews make with each other and with different places. One of the things, if I can just add something here, one of the things that we've included in the later volumes are some recipes, because cookbooks become this genre in which Jews remember the past. And recipes, are compilations as well that give people tastes of what it was like back then.
Pun intended.
Right. So you can find a recipe, for example, on how to bake a bagel in the Posen library. Bagels, aren't invented in the United States. They actually, come from Europe originally, but, Jews do interesting things with them. They modify them and turn them in the United States into a very distinctive Jewish food, which now, of course, a lot of people don't even know was originally a Jewish food. I did a course at Michigan, and one of the parts of the course was dealt with food, and one of the students said, "Oh, I really like bagels. I didn't realize they were Jewish."
What?
So
what?
Yeah, because because they're all over. Yeah.
They're ubiquitous now. It's ubiquitous. And I was laughing about this. I was talking to my dad about this just a couple of days ago, and I told him who we were going to be talking to, and we were saying how like I said, even in one location, let's just go with the arts in the United States. I mean, we're talking about a culture that encompasses both Sid Caesar and Philip Roth. How do you account for that? How do you account? I mean, it's just any one of these areas, the kind of overwhelming, like I said, that was why my curation question comes up. And I hadn't even thought about cookbooks. I hadn't thought about the permeation of Jewish cuisine as it is kind of rippled through, American culture in and of itself. I mean, bagels is, people go to Panera now, say, boy, Panera makes good bagels. And it's like, Panera is not what you would call the locale for, bagels, No. Although I will tell you this, though, in our neighborhood, you're going to love this, there's a place called the Kosher Cajun, because I'm down here in New Orleans. And it's just amazing how so many people will come into a community who are Jewish from other communities and will assimilate, taking both what they enjoy about the culture they are in, and while at the same time maintaining their own cultural integrity. And that seems to be an ongoing theme, too. It's one of the few religions where people say, I don't like the religion much, but the culture, I'll keep it around with me. It's just an interesting kind of, I'm all over the place because this whole thing, like I said, it's overwhelming at some points.
Well, I mean, you keep hitting really important notes because that's exactly what happens. It happens with food, as I guess this kosher Cajun, but they're taking local traditions, but using some of the constraints, I assume, of a kosher system, which then makes slight changes, and that turns it into an aspect of Jewish culture. And Jews do that. They do that with their religion too, as well as with other elements of culture. But it's a really good example of how Jewish culture changes across time and space, and the constant relationship that Jews have with the surrounding societies in which they live, absorbing elements of their culture and making it their own, making it Jewish in the process, and then creating and making contributions back to the culture itself. It's really a two-way process.
On this particular day, it is important to point out too, one of the great betrayals at the center of the Holocaust was that so many of the people who were in Germany considered themselves Germans first, and there's often a really kind of great conversation to be had that sometimes people who are not from a place end up being the most patriotic in that place, in the way that so many immigrants are so hyper patriotic in both how they view the country and all of that. And there really seems to be an ongoing theme too in regards to Jewish culture, that cross-pollination you talked about, the idea of embracing the local culture or the culture that they have adopted, and then almost offering the gifts that they have to offer to enter into dialogue with that conversation. It doesn't feel separate. The idea that it's like, we have bagels, they are now yours. We have traditions. You are welcome to embrace them with us and be part of the rhythm. I mean, you think about the idea of a Brooklyn accent. How much of that is shaped by the cadences of so many of the people that made the journey from the old world to the new? And it's this ongoing kind of conversation that they continue to have to this very day. Let me ask you something in regards to the artwork that kind of moves through this. Mm-hmm. That's the other curation question I had. There's a lot of artwork, a lot of visual stuff that people can look at. How'd you make those decisions? I hate to keep putting you on the spot about that, but I was kind of overwhelmed. I'm like, that's pretty smart,
Well, of course, we do have fantastic advisors because we're, no one editor knows everything. And I think that it is a help, but we're looking for different points of view. So if you look in Volume 9, the latest volume, for example, just in terms of some of the visual material in the years of the Holocaust, you have some photographs that were taken in the ghetto by a Jewish photographer, truly an unusual piece of photography. But at the same time, you have this sort of famous photograph that was taken by a Jewish photographer. He called himself Ouija. His name was actually Arthur Felig, of Coney Island, masses of people at Coney Island. And seeing them together, right, this is 1942, the ghetto photograph and the Ouija photograph is very, very powerful to gain a sense of what was happening in the Jewish world at this time. I would add that what's also very powerful is in this volume, they include a number of comics. And the comics, when you think of them, not just as part of American culture, but, Captain America, right? Or Will Eisner's The Spirit. You can see them as a way of responding to the Jewish situation, but translating that response into a completely different kind of art form. I'm not answering exactly how things are chosen, but I think that what happens also is that the choices are made in certain kinds of categories, and then they come together, and it's the coming together that becomes truly powerful. Truly powerful.
Yeah, it's extraordinary too. And, you and I talked for a little bit about some of my background stuff, and of course, and by the way, guys, I am, because I'm doing this. We're being very Euro and North American focused here, but this is a worldwide event in regards to what's happening here. It deals with stuff all across the globe and across the planet, and doesn't just focus in one particular area. It's looking at all of these. I'm just always kind of blown away too by how much of our sense of humor, how much of American, I've always said that American humor is a combination of the Borscht Belt and Mark Twain, and somewhere in the middle we actually created what is a very, very unique sense of humor, and so much of that contribution. Guys, if you want to get any sense of this, you just brought up, Jewish American cartoonists. It's staggering. It is staggering the number of names that pop up in regards to, whether it's Rube Goldberg or Neil Adams or Ralph Bakshi. It goes on and on and on. And like I said, the thing here is to kind of pick a place where you want to start and see where the world takes you. So talk about the event, talk about the launch, not the launch, but talk about what you got going on with this and what you'd really like people to make sure they do, how people can actually register. Let's repeat that so people can get involved in this and check this out.
Sure. So you go to posenlibrary.com. It takes you to a landing page, and then you say register for free. You go and you put your email address in and stuff, and you get a confirmation email, right? So, and then you're on. And once you go on, it's really worthwhile searching for whatever it is you're particularly interested in. If you're interested in politics, you can search politics. If you're interested in the visual culture, you can search visual culture. You can search by genres or by specific topics. And I like to say that people can, in a sense, become their own anthologists. They can pull together materials that they find very meaningful in a way that's somewhat different from what the editors themselves did. One of the things, since I'm a historian, I like to do is when I pick a category, I like to also put a date with it. So if you pick the category, let's say, of religious and political culture, and you put the date 1963 next to it, you get some wonderful, interesting juxtapositions. You get a piece by Hannah Arendt, who was a famous political philosopher, fled Germany. And
a big comeback these days. A lot of people reading her these days. Oh, boy.
That's correct. Yes, and so this is a piece from her Eichmann in Jerusalem when Adolf Eichmann was tried, right, in the early 60s. Then you get a piece from Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique, which really sort of launches a new feminist movement in the United States, same year, 1963. And then you get this incredible the whole speech that Rabbi Joachim Prince gave at the March on Washington in 1963, just before Martin Luther King Jr. spoke.
Deborah Moore, by the way, it's been a pleasure having you. Please promise me you'll come back so we can get into specifics.
I will. Okay. Take care.
Thank you so much. Guys, we'll be right back after these messages.